have our dear friends from Daya Houston, Rachna Kher and Tisha Bedi from Daya Houston, and I think I said that. And we will be discussing domestic violence.
Yes.
It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
It is. Every October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
But every month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
That's
for
true.
us,
That's
too.
true.
I bet.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just really interested to know. Shall we just dive right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and what is the purpose of this month, and what are some overall statistics that you want to bring to light?
So Domestic Violence Awareness Month is every October. You know, the world kind of comes together to celebrate survivors and also bring light and awareness to the public health crisis that is domestic violence. So as Tisha was saying at Daya, we're doing that every month, every day, but we use this month to really try to get the message out there. Unfortunately, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men, in some places, in some studies it shows 1 in 4 men are still experiencing domestic violence. In same-sex couples, there's been as high as 30% of partners who are in same-sex couples report domestic violence as well. But even more locally, I mean, obviously since the pandemic, everything has just increased. It's increased because there's the isolation. We were, stuck at home for so long. Domestic violence since the pandemic started increased by 40% in Houston alone. And when I looked at the statistics, the number of domestic violence incidents in August, so just 2 months ago, 78% higher than it was same time last year. And so this isn't something that is going away, as we all get vaccinated and are able to, do more things together. Domestic violence is not going down, and so it's important that we continue to really raise awareness that this is a very real thing in our community.
It's kind of, earlier on in this conversation, you mentioned men also, and anytime I think of domestic violence, the only thing that I would normally go to is women and children.
Yeah.
I would never think men are also abused.
And at such high rates, and that's just what's reported, right? So my thought might be that there's much more out there.
There's a lot of underreporting because people aren't aware that, they can report as men.
Yeah, especially within our culture, right?
Exactly.
You're just like, oh no, I mean, how am I going to go in?
Right, and what are people going to think, right?
Yeah.
Which
I
is
think
the same
that's all
thing.
cultures,
Yes.
though. I don't think it's just men in general.
Exactly, yeah. I think there's a lot of similarities between all cultures on how we, as a society, view and react to domestic violence, which is usually with silence and just kind of brushing it under the rug.
Yeah. So who can be a survivor?
That is a very good question because anyone can be a survivor, as we were just discussing, men, women, children, LGBTQ community. Those numbers are heavily underreported as well because we tend to overlook those statistics and just focus on, the run-of-the-mill sort of women being hit by their husbands. So anyone can be a survivor, and it's actually really sad that more people aren't stepping forward to say that they have been, abused or are survivors as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. It's just, there's so much shame and silence around coming forward as a survivor. And, I heard something really great at a conference I was at where, a lot of people, we all know the saying, shame on you. And when talking to survivors, the keynote speaker at this conference said, shame off you, actually. And I loved that. I thought that was so powerful. And because the more people that come forward, the safer it gets, not only for their family, but for our whole community, right? I mean, it really, really makes a difference. And like Tisha was saying, anyone can be a survivor, including abusers, right? There is this cycle of abuse that we talk about. The more you witness or experience domestic violence, the more likely you are to become a victim or a perpetrator. And so a very clear, people say, well, why do people abuse? A lot of times, they've grown up having this normalized and experiencing this abuse themselves. Now, it is always still a decision you make, whether you're going to bring that unhealthy and abusive behavior into your relationship. But it is what keeps that cycle going, is
It
that,
stems from childhood.
yeah, we continue to normalize it. And
So
not,
we are the ones that are setting that example for our children. How we behave and act in our homes
absolutely.
is what they're learning, that behavior.
Absolutely, it's the most powerful thing is what children see when they're growing up.
I do definitely want to have some stories from you guys of survivors.
Yeah.
If you guys have any to share, maybe later on.
Yeah,
We have a lot of
absolutely.
questions to go over. So, what are some of the different types of abuse? What do you see most in the South Asian community?
Well, in the South Asian community specifically, we see all the different kinds of abuse, and as we've said, a lot of people just think like the physical abuse, right? But there's all different kinds of abuse. 99% of people who are abused experience some kind of financial abuse as well. So that shows up in our community as if you're an immigrant, your spouse not applying for a work permit for you, not allowing you to work, forcing you to work in family businesses for no pay. If you are working, keeping all your money, not allowing you to have a look at the family finances. Even somebody who, many families, right? One parent works, one stays at home. That's all good, but there still needs to be equity in that relationship, and so access to finances. And then immigration abuse shows up quite a bit in the South Asian community for immigrants, where abusers will not file the proper paperwork, ensure that the victim becomes undocumented, and then it's that much scarier to reach out for help because you don't want to be deported, and that's a very, very real fear. And then I think the last one that really sticks out for me in the South Asian community is in-law abuse. And is another way, I think, because of our families are so multi-generational, and there's many multi-family homes, that in-law abuse shows up quite a bit in the South Asian community. Mother-in-law, father-in-law to the daughter-in-law is what we typically see. However, it can go many different ways. And then overall, do you want to talk a little bit about emotional and psychological abuse as well? Because that, I think, impacts our community so much, but is culturally, like, universal.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And those impact our community. I mean, I would say the same, or maybe even so much more, because our families are so, like, our family dynamics within the South Asian culture are so complicated and so different that, like, and especially with mental health not being such a big topic of conversation.
That doesn't even exist in our culture, right?
Absolutely. And those two, go hand in hand, the psychological and emotional abuse, is that, it's not recognized, and it's just like talking about feelings, and feelings aren't necessarily recognized within our culture. And so people tend to, internalize that. And when they learn, when I, have in the past gone out into the community and like educated on psychological and emotional abuse, a lot of people have said like, hey, I didn't even know that was a form of abuse.
Right. I hear that quite a bit too. Or people say, oh, well, at least you're not being hit, right? Or they minimize that psychological abuse, which is, psychological abuse has extreme side, like the repercussions are PTSD, depression, anxiety, but also physical stuff, increased heart disease, all of these things, because you're in a constant mode of fear and anxiety, being so stressed out, and it really does impact people mentally and physically.
Absolutely. And the last one that I never even knew before I started working in this field was spiritual abuse, that, either refraining you from going to your, faith centers, or forcing you to go to a certain faith center, and isolating you from like going there because they know that faith leaders are, some of the first people that you would contact in order to get any type of help. So that one was brand new to me.
There's so many types, and it all boils down to power and control, right? An abuser is always trying to maintain power and control over their partner. And so whatever multitude of ways they can do that, most people aren't experiencing just one kind of abuse. Whatever way they can do that, they will do that. And it leaves people very lonely, isolated, and confused too. It's confusing because this is somebody that you love and who claim to love you as well. It's very confusing.
Wow. Okay, so what services does DIA provide, and who do you help?
So, our mission is to empower South Asian survivors of domestic and sexual violence with culturally specific services. And so what that looks like is we put on our cultural lens with everything we do, right? So anytime we're working on safety planning with survivors, counseling with survivors, legal assistance, housing assistance, helping them with basic needs, we're always wearing that cultural lens. But there's nobody at all that's turned away from DIA services. So we see about 15 to 20% of our clients every year are not South Asian, but they're coming from families where some of these dynamics are the same, and some are from other immigrant communities, but some are not. Some are just experiencing things that we happen to have expertise in. I will say one of the most powerful things about, and of course I'm biased, but one of the most powerful things about DIA to me is that the services don't have a very short time frame. Like there are many places where you can only get 6 sessions of counseling, things like that. We really work with clients for many, many years. The services are always free, always confidential. And really, I also think case management is something that is extremely important. People say like, okay, what do your employees do? They are experts in all of those community resources that are out there, and they're helping people navigate those resources. How to get to the food bank, like what documents do you need to get into housing programs? Like this is stuff that people then don't have to figure out on their own when they're in a crisis. Like you have this person that's helping you along the way. We let the client lead. The client always leads. We say, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Here are some options. And it's a partnership. Survivors and advocates work together in partnerships to get people to those small goals. And we say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so that's a really important part of our services. Lots of all of our services are provided in different South Asian languages. And even if somebody calls that doesn't speak one of the languages that we speak in-house, we work really hard to get them the proper translation that they need, so that people can tell their story in their own language.
Yeah, and I think that comfort level is more increased too.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Somebody who you walk in and you're like, okay, this person understands in-law abuse. Like, we don't have to explain it.
Cultural nuances that,
Yes.
oh, I can't do counseling in front of my parents because they don't believe in counseling and stuff like that.
That's right. And many people come in without friends or family support. And that to me is one of my hopes, is that people will start reaching out to us sooner. Because when someone's in a crisis, it gets very, very difficult. We do everything that we can with that person, but they're in such a state of stress that, so we say if there are even red flags that your relationship is abusive, to just give us a call. Everything, again, is free and confidential. So even if you start working with us, you can decide not to, you can come back. It's really all in the client's
contract holding.
Absolutely not.
And the doors are always open.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, you're breaking a contract and giving them freedom from their past life.
Yes. Yes. Our hope is that people can start to build autonomy and safety in the way that, at the pace they want to, and in the way that makes the most sense for their life. Because they're really the experts of their life, and you think about people who are experiencing trauma and abuse. They're very intelligent and strong, resilient people. And so we really rely on them to tell us, okay, how can we just help you get to your goals?
Yeah. And it's funny because I've seen a couple of people in my life that were victims of abuse, and you see them outside of their home. They're these strong, independent people, and you would never think that what's going on inside their home, but as soon as they're in their home, they go into a shell and they're just, and it's such a big difference.
And that's a safety mechanism too, right? We've all heard of fight or flight, but freeze is one as well. And so if you have to freeze in order to stay alive and to be safe, then that's actually the smartest decision for that person. It just, we always say that whatever someone's reaction is to the violence they're experiencing is the correct reaction in that moment, because it's kept them alive and it continues to keep them alive.
After 12, thank you.
Okay, well, I think it is time for a break, but when we come back, we will continue this conversation. You are listening to 99.5 FM, and we are on air with DIA Houston. before we ended, we were gonna go into what is the biggest barrier the South Asian survivors face.
Well, I think the single-handed biggest barrier that the South Asian community faces is the taboo. Culturally, in families, just socially, is the taboo of speaking up about personal issues that are happening in the family, because we're always taught that, like, anything that happens in the family should not even get out. So that's one of the biggest taboos. The second one is like, what will divorce do to the family? Because the kids are the most important, and like, you should just stick through all of it so that your kids have a brighter future.
Yeah.
So that's the one that
I agree. Yeah, we have clients from all different backgrounds, right? Different ages, religions, incomes. And the one thing that everybody is worried about is what other people will say. And that is absolutely, I agree, the biggest taboo across, whether it's new immigrants or second generation people. It just, it's a huge,
I just wish
it's a
that
huge
would
barrier.
stop.
it's the low kya bolenge.
Yeah, exactly. And that bothers me so much. I really wish that would
And
stop.
the interesting thing is, and I'd love to think about this, for everyone to think about this, is when somebody leaves a relationship, they say, oh my gosh, how could they leave how could they break up their family? How could they do that? And if somebody is experiencing domestic violence, and if they are, God forbid, murdered, a lot of times they say, well, why didn't they leave?
Yeah.
It's like,
It's like you're damned if you do.
yeah, it's this double-edged sword, that no matter what, the taboo is the thing that's, I wish it wasn't one of these the thing that's impacting safety, but it's impacting safety so much. Just what we say as a community is impacting a whole family's safety.
And victim blaming is so prevalent, as well as that she must have done something, or like done something to her husband to why
She's being treated that way.
and vice versa. I mean,
That's right.
Yeah. That is so sad. It's a sad world we live in.
Because the other barriers, there are wonderful resources across our city. We have such a committed mayor, such a committed, we've over 20 domestic violence agencies in the city. So there's a lot of help out there, but that taboo is a huge hurdle to cross.
So why do victims sometimes return or stay with their abusers?
So sometimes it's financially the only thing that they can do. Yeah. So we talked about financial abuse and the children, right? And in many cases, they are having to make a decision between roof over their head, food on the table for their children, or, and that's a really tough place to be. For immigrants, a lot of times it's, okay, I can risk being deported, and my American-born child might, would stay here with the abusive parent. Those are very real reasons that people stay or return. And then the other surprising thing that I learned, one of the surprises for me was that the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they flee. Because an abuser, again, abuse is all about power and control. And they're like, okay, this person's leaving, and so that's like, I'm losing control. And that's when the abuse escalates. That's when homicide is much more likely. There are, in dating violence, even in unmarried couples, 60% of dating violence occurs after the relationship has officially ended, because it is that I have to still have control over you. And that's why fleeing cannot be a one-time, like, okay, I'm going to go tonight. And a lot of people, as trying to be helpful friends, will say, okay, let's pack your bags, let's go now, let's go now. And it has to be a process. And so that's why I would say, like Daya and other domestic violence agencies in the city, having a plan in place, a plan that includes saving cash, having a friend who you can have a bag, all your
Ready.
important documents at, having shelter space or a hotel you're going to stay at. Where do you have transportation? Who in your family can you trust, right? It's a long process, but the good thing is that Daya is here to do all of that planning with survivors, and there's no rush. We always say, let's take this at your at your pace and also at the pace that you know is safest for you and your children.
Absolutely.
So sometimes it even includes like opening a separate banking account or even like starting a job on the side or starting to apply for jobs so that once you flee, you know, the reality is you do need a home, you do need food. And so these are some things that, I mean, this is why it takes months to plan to flee if you have been so isolated for so long.
And what happens if they have a kid?
We absolutely recommend fleeing with the child. In many,
How would the court system work then?
you know, the nice thing about that is when you flee, you're likely still married, and so there's no kidnapping charges that can be filed. Both parents have the ability to take the child at any time when you're still married. There's no custody order in place. And so the courts, I believe, and I want to believe, and I do believe that they look positively on survivors who take their child with them, even if that means living in a hotel or living in a shelter, may not be as comfortable as your house, of course, but what you are ensuring is that there's safety here and that the abuser is not going to retaliate by harming the child because the survivor left. We absolutely say that you should take your child with you when you flee. It's a good question.
Yeah. So what would make it easier for victims to seek help?
I'm a little biased on this as well because I do outreach and education, but what I've noticed is like going out into certain communities and actually really talking to community members and educating them about domestic violence, sexual assault, and also what services we offer as an agency. You know, as I mentioned earlier, help them realize that, oh my gosh, I didn't even know like emotional abuse was a form of domestic violence. So planting that seed in their head has been really beneficial in like getting survivors to step forward and, you know, seek help. So that's, you know, my biased answer.
I agree. No, I agree. And I think like the other thing that would make it easier is if we as a community applauded that move, right? Instead of keeping it so secret and shameful, if we said, look at what this person did for their family and for their community, they ended a generational cycle of violence in our community. That is no small feat, you know, and so I think if we celebrated healthy relationships and if we prioritized healthy relationships over just any relationship, I think that would make it much easier for people to seek help because they know that they would have all these people who have their back and who are supporting them
As a team.
Yeah.
So if you know someone in an abusive relationship, what should you do?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to validate their experience, right? So it's about saying, you don't deserve this. I believe you. I'm sorry this is happening to you. They seem like really easy sentences, but these are things that people don't hear. They really don't hear. The first thing they hear is like, well, what did you do? Or, oh, well, maybe this, or, you know,
break up with him.
Or
leave.
you know, all this kind of advice, or stay for the kids, right? Whatever that looks like. And so what we recommend is not to give advice. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but instead of giving advice, to go talk to your friend alone, right? So I would pull a friend aside and say, I've noticed these things. I'm worried about you. I just want to let you know that if you want to talk about anything, I am here. It will be completely confidential. You know, I'm just here for you. That's number one, is to talk to them privately and then really just validate their experience. Go through options with them. You can call Daya. You can, what do you think about separating for a few months? What would that look like? You know, and so go through the options with them so that they don't feel so alone. And then really the other piece of advice that I would give to friends who are trying to help their friends is that to focus on your friend, not the abuser, to not say, oh my gosh, he's so horrible, or she shouldn't do that, you know, all those things, because their world already has to revolve around this person, because this person is being so controlling and harmful. And so for you to focus only on them and their well-being, that's so powerful, because hey, then they know that you're there for them, that you're on their team. Jinx.
So why do people abuse, and what are some of the warning signs?
So we talked a little bit about the why earlier, which is witnessing domestic violence, patriarchal systems in our society, gender roles that are clearly, just
Been in
rigid
place,
and unnecessary, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And these cycles carry forward, right? That can be a reason why people abuse. It's an explanation, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's always a choice, right? There's always a choice to not harm somebody. If you see these patterns in yourself, to not be in a relationship is an option.
Yeah.
To seek support, to seek help for your behavior is an option. Some of the red flags, my gosh, there's so many, but the one that I think is the most telling is jealousy. I think that jealousy can sometimes be painted in a way that's romantic and sort of like not taking no for an answer and like things like that. And, oh, he wants me so much. And, or, oh, this like form of obsession.
Yeah.
It's a huge red flag. If somebody is not wanting you, is trying to take your time, your space, not wanting you to talk to your friends or family because they're jealous, and they frame it as, well, I love you so much that this is why that I'm doing this, huge red flag.
That's so shocking to me because like growing up seeing like my friends in relationships, me being in a relationship, I would always think, oh my gosh, like, jealousy is so cute.
Romantic.
It's so
Yeah.
romantic.
Yeah.
So romantic.
But then
It's a huge red flag. And so I would say, no matter the age, if you're with a very jealous partner, that's a big red flag for an at least unhealthy, if not abusive, relationship. And then really control, right? Isolation is a good one.
Like sometimes when friends have gotten into relationships and they've, sort of stepped back, I tend to realize like, oh yeah, their life is now changing.
Yeah.
But then it's always a red flag when I can't even see them, for our weekly, happy hour events, if I can't see them on the weekends. And so that's when in the past I have talked to friends before is, you seem to be isolating yourself.
Yeah.
Or
That's true. That is true. And of course, if you see bruises, if you see the physical signs of harm, again, pulling a friend aside and just asking them privately what happened, in a way that shows compassion too, nothing accusatory. And if you see somebody, the way two people may talk to each other, if you see name calling, putting people down, insults, shaming, know that what you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Way worse
And
than
so
anything.
it's way worse when they're alone.
And one thing that I really wanted to point out is people will only talk when they're ready to talk. So like try to not force anything out of your friends or family members because that's another form of control over them. It's like you're forcing them to tell you. And so in their brains they're having the same fight, flight, or freeze reaction that they would if they were being abused.
Right. And that's why I said, like, we don't give advice. We give options. We let clients lead the way because we don't believe in controlling somebody. And that is a form of control as well. And it may be well-meaning, especially from parents and loved ones, but know that you can't make the change for somebody because truly they're going to know what is the safest thing to do to stay alive, quite frankly.
So, can abusers change, and do you offer couples counseling?
We don't offer couples counseling, and in fact, couples counseling is not indicated for relationships in which there is such a power dynamic and where there's abuse. Because in those relationships, it's not about communication, it's not about compromise. One person literally holds all the power.
Yeah.
Can abusers change? There are programs called Battering Intervention Prevention Programs. It's BIP for short. An organization called AVDA in Houston offers an amazing one. However, the thing that all this research shows is that the abuser has to want to change. And they have to drive that change. So if they are court mandated, or if they do it because of the family pressure, or they do it because of a custody issue or whatever, that is likely not going to work. There's probably not going to be this aha moment. They have to want to change. And what I say to survivors is that it's not your job to stay around and wait for that change. In fact, your job is to take care of yourself. first and foremost. And and so sitting and waiting for somebody to change, or saying you've got to go to therapy, or all ultimatums and things like that, they're likely not going to work until that person takes accountability for their own actions, for the harm that they're doing, even if they grew up in the most
loving,
or I was gonna say the most like horrible household,
Okay.
right? Even in that case, again, it's a reason, but it's not an excuse.
And
so
also,
have you? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if they've made that choice once or twice or however many other times,
Yeah.
they have the option of making that choice again. So maybe there might be a long time that they don't act in that manner,
Yeah.
but there's no promise because they've made that choice again. It's not like something that's in your brain that could be changed.
That's right. That's right.
Have you seen any cases where an abuser has changed?
I haven't. No.
No. Wow. Okay.
It's not common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't. I mean, the
It's sad.
reasons for these things are so deep rooted in
Yeah.
our society, right?
Yeah.
It's patriarchy, it's homophobia, right? It's toxic masculinity. It's the man has to be in control. These concepts are thousands and thousands of years
Yes.
old, right?
Yes.
So
I roll my eyes as you say this. I'm just like,
and it's really
cringing.
I mean, it's really hard to unlearn that
Yeah.
stuff. So I haven't seen it happen. However, we don't have a BIP program, so that's another thing.
So, why should we worry about domestic violence in someone else's relationship, and how does it impact us? And that's a question that I think a lot of people.
Yeah.
Why get involved? Why meddle in?
Yeah, so I think the most important reason is all these generational cycles that we've been talking
Yeah.
about. So if there is a child living in a home, in an
Yes.
abusive home, that child's going to grow up to be an adult, and then the cycle keeps going. And so
Yes.
maybe in your relationship, in your family, there is no abuse at the moment. Okay, what are who could your son or daughter grow up to then date or marry or form a relationship with, right? The other thing is very much in the now. Domestic violence costs billions of dollars per year. It costs more than most wars.
Wow.
Because of the medical costs, the loss of productivity, because most survivors are forced to stop working. They're forced to take time off of work. Their abusers show up at their job, and then they are often let go of that job because it creates an unsafe work environment for everyone else. There are legal costs. There, jail time, few and far between, but the jail time that is given to abusers. I mean, this is a public health crisis. It's costing our country literally billions of dollars every year. And so we should all care about it for that reason, and also because when you see, right, like when there's mass murders, the majority of mass murders when they take place, there's either the active or the shooter's a family member or a loved one or a family member of a loved one
Right.
is part of that victimization. And so when these big public crises happen, when these mass shootings happen, much of the time we can bring it back to some sort of interpersonal violence. And so even if beyond caring about healthy relationships for everybody, which is fine, I completely understand if people are like, well, this is my family and this is what I want to prioritize. You have to think about the public safety issue that is out there, and the risk to the generations that are going to come after you, and also to you in the moment, with the way that firearms too are so prevalent in our community, in our state.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a scary thought. So, if we want to learn more about domestic violence, where should we go?
There are so many amazing resources online. I mean, I can think of 5 on top of my head that I personally go to learn more about statistics that are, for 2021. So, I mean, the DAO website has a lot of information.
It's a good one.
And it's an amazing one. And our social media, we tend to repost a lot of articles and just stats from other agencies as well, which touch base on topics that maybe we don't specialize in, but they do, different cultures and religions. And so, online, I mean, looking up websites such as like API, GBV.
Yeah, there's one called Love is Respect, which is a great one for dating violence. There's 2 books that I always recommend. One is a little bit newer. It's called No Visible Bruises. It made a big splash, I think, about 2 years ago. It's fantastic, and it really looks at all the different kinds of domestic violence. It's really amazing. And then the one that really is at the top of my list is a book called Why Does He Do That? And it's by a researcher named Lundy Bancroft. And it's really like the most compelling book about domestic violence, and really explains why do abusers do that. And it is a wonderful, wonderful book. He's an incredible researcher, a hero at DIA for sure. We always said, what would Lundy Bancroft say? So,
So, any stories?
Yeah. So I will say that really it takes time. You know, we've talked about some grim and dark things, and I would say that it does take time to come out of an abusive relationship, especially if you've been in it for a long time. Yeah. But, you know, we've had lots of success stories. We have a woman who, when she first came to DIA, it was because the police came to her home for a really horrible physical assault, and she had 2 kids, and she was pregnant, and she wasn't ready to leave the relationship because there was so much abuse, and her immigration status wasn't complete, and she did not know English, and there was a lot of barriers. She didn't know how she was going to raise her kids with her husband in jail. Wow. And where she is now, I mean, she was so upset that this had happened because, you know, I mean, this is her whole life. And where she is now is just quite incredible. She's completely, you know, we did ESL classes through some of our partner agencies, driving lessons. She had horrible eye injuries from her abuse, which have now been corrected. Her new baby is thriving and healthy. Kids are doing great. One of her sons is like an amazing artist, and I'm actually having him do some artwork for some greeting cards that we're going to make from DIA, and he'll be doing the artwork for it.
So sweet.
And really, it's still a process, right? Like, she's still having to navigate housing and working, and she's got a job now, but it's like, am I getting enough hours, and childcare and all those things, but she's doing it. And so, you know, I think that is the key. What I think could take her from surviving to really thriving is if we as a community could shift the things that we prioritize, you know, instead of, you know, is it more important that a family stays together or that a family stays alive? You know, is it more important that, you know, your child stays closeted and your family doesn't know that they're gay? Or is it more important that they are treated with respect and compassion? Is it important for women to have children, or is it more important for them to have autonomy and freedom? And so I think the same things in our culture that are creating the barriers, if we flip it, those things can be used for healing. I really do think we can do that.
Yeah. And lastly, do you have any takeaway for our listeners from the show?
Yeah, you know, I would say just take a moment to think about what could be possible.
Yes.
You know, if you start to work towards letting go of that taboo, to breaking down that taboo, be a part of that with us. Yes. And celebrate the healthy relationships and celebrate the people who are making our community safer, which is all those survivors.
Absolutely. And if they
Support
need to get
them.
in touch with DIA Houston, what are the options they have?
Lots of options. So you can email at contact@diahouston.org. You can call 713-981-7645. You can reach out through our website at diahouston.org as well. And you can reach out through our social media on Facebook, and we will immediately then connect you via email to an advocate, because that's social media is something that's used a lot for stalking in abusive relationships. But those are all ways that you can reach out. Yeah. Again, we're culturally specific for South Asian survivors, but anyone is welcome. People across the gender spectrum, people of all sexual orientations, single, married, young, old. Anyone is, DIA is here for everybody.
We're completely confidential.
Yes, and I know that's so important to our community.
Yes.
Who's going to find out? Nobody, unless you want them to.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. I just wanted to share some comments
Yeah.
on Facebook. This one was from Swati. She says trauma has been linked to many autoimmune disorders or disease. I have
true.
another one from Swati who says jail time given to the survivor acting in self-defense.
She's so right about that. She's so right about that because abusers can sometimes will physically abuse in places that are hidden, and
Right.
if you're defending yourself and if you're using scratching or hitting, those are things that are very visible. And many times when the police come, they're just gathering evidence, and so that scratch, that's more evidence than a bruise that you have from a week ago. And so we do see survivors experiencing jail time. Thank you, Swati, for bringing that up.
And then Richika says, excellent information. Thank you for sharing the book resources as well. Roseman says, great topic and awareness. You ladies are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I will, really just my ask to everyone is that they take some time to think about how to reframe the priorities that we have.
Yes.
And how to make sure that we have healthy families, not just families that are together,
Yes.
but healthy families. And families can come in all shapes and sizes and ways. And it can be your chosen family as well, right?
Yeah.
And so we want
Absolutely.
everyone to have autonomy and safety.
Wow. Thank you, Rachna and Tisha, for joining us here on 99.5 FM with your Chai Time.
Thank you for having us.
Oh my God!
always,
I
for the
always-
platform.
Yes, we love you guys, and I can't wait to do more shows with you guys.
Yes.
It's always such a great time having you guys.